much for joining me. This is going to be one of maybe a two-part video. Let's just see how long this runs for, which will basically cover everything that I've knit, or at least everything that I've knit that I still have. I've done quite a lot of cliff knitting over the years, so definitely a few gaps. This video was inspired by the number of, what I've knit in 2022 videos, and I started to pull together what I knit last year. And in doing so, I noticed some really interesting trends. One being, how long it takes me to produce certain things and how many kind of re-knits of things that I do. But it led me to actually going through all the stuff that I've knit, and so I thought I'd share that with all of you, and kind of just reflect on my knitting journey so far. So I hope this will be of interest for beginner knitters. Hopefully there's some kind of bits that you can borrow from my experience that help you in your knitting journey. And for those more experienced knitters, maybe some of what I'm saying will resonate with you. Maybe you've had similar experiences. Maybe you have got some insight for me as to what might push my knitting on to that next level. And then of course, I mean, if you're anything like me, I just love seeing what everyone's knit. I think you get a really good idea of people's aesthetics, and hopefully for, given how new this channel is, hopefully it'll give you an idea of what you can expect from my knitting going forwards. So I think this first part, I'm going to start with sweaters. We'll see how we do time-wise, as I said. Maybe we'll have to do kind of more like accessories in a second video. But for now, take a sip of your drink. I hope you have one. Get comfy. If you've got your knitting out, that's great. If you are just taking some downtime and some time to be still, that's also amazing. I have got a cup of tea with me, so please excuse me as I take a sip throughout this podcast recording. And yeah, I think that's it. In case anyone is interested, this beautiful mug is made by a local young person in my area called June Dobson. They have created their own small business and make the most beautiful pottery and ceramics, and were recently featured in Vogue, which I think is such a point of inspiration for us all, that starting small, you can grow really big really quickly. And I just think what they create is beautiful. I'm going to hold it up a little bit closer so you can see, but it's got these kind of 3D seed heads, and this part is kind of raw matte ceramic, and then this is glazed at the top here with a lovely handle. And one of my favourite features, it's got this little thing to rest your thumb on. So I love this mug. I've got some black tea with a kind of slight berry infusion over the top. So yes, let's get started. Okay, I'm going to put this up here, I think. Let's hope I don't forget. And I'm going to be probably resorting my hair a few times. You'll have seen in last episodes or previous episodes that I put it up in a bun quite often. I don't often have it down, but it is, in full disclosure and being really real, still a little bit wet. So it's going to be down. Sorry if playing with it gets annoying. Right. So, I'm going to go way back to the beginning of my knitting journey. So as I might have mentioned in my first episode, I don't know, I can't quite remember how much I covered, but I've been knitting since I was about 7. A friend of my mum's bought me a scarf kit, plastic straight needles on like I imagine they're probably about a 5mm, 6mm needle, and some pink and black very chunky yarn. And it was a kit and something to kind of entertain me during the school holidays. So she sat next to me on the sofa, taught me knit stitch, and then just kind of left me to it. So I don't have that first project anymore. I don't think I ever really even finished the scarf. I think I kind of just played around with making knit stitches. And that was pretty much what I did for the next 13 years, bit less, 7 years. Anyway, I basically, as growing up, I was always sewing and making things. but I was never someone that really finished projects. I was quite impatient, and I was kind of my attention was getting diverted all over the place. So I always had balls of yarn in my room, my bedroom at home, but they never really made anything. I kind of just played with them, quite literally. And then when I went to university, my first year of uni, I was living on my own, so not just having moved out of home, but I actually was in accommodation where I was on my own. And whilst I had quite a busy life outside, you know, university and sports and all sorts, I wanted to fill the time that I did have by myself with making and creative things, because I ended up doing quite a book heavy degree. I studied law, and so my creativity really needed an outlet, and so I started picking up knitting again. And so the first project that I did, having moved out of home and gone to uni, was a sweater, and this is that sweater. It is a sweater from a Vogue knitting book, Knit in Pieces, and I knit it in garter stitch. I think the actual pattern was meant to be it was meant to be almost like colour work in some sort of seed stitch. I'll have to try and find the original pattern. And the Vogue knitting book had a very specific yarn type in there, which I don't think I could find. So, and this was not a point where I knew about gauge or anything like that. So in reflection, I was incredibly lucky that this turned out the way it did, because I really didn't know what I was doing. So I think I knit this up I bought the yarn from John Lewis, and this was knit on some straight needles. I mean, this looks like a kind of chunky, heavy worsted to chunky weight yarn to me. And I just bought 2 colours, and I kind of modified the pattern, not with any kind of skill, just based on what I could do. I kind of tried to make the pattern fit my current skill level. Anyway, so the project is seamed. It's a kind of semi-raglan shaped front, but you seam the sleeves. I think this yarn has got some alpaca in it, because over the years this sleeve has got longer and longer. As you can see, it's enormously long. And what's quite amusing is at the neckline, as you might be able to see, it told me to pick up stitches, and I just didn't know how, and I was working on straight needles, so picking up in the round felt really difficult. So I just cast off, and then in the contrast yarn, just like whip stitched around the top. So definitely not a finessed project. But anyway, it's a relatively cropped jumper, and it's really cosy, and that's why I actually still wear this. I chuck it on when I'm around the house, and I need something really squishy. And as you'll see when I show you the next few projects that I did, sweater projects, I moved away from using such chunky yarn, and so it's actually been only recently that I've ended up with a sweater that's of a similar thickness to this. So anyway, that was my starting point, and that, to be honest, was pretty much my first knitting project when I got serious. And then, that must have been 2015, and then I carried on kind of playing with knitting. I made like a couple of headbands, again in kind of garter stitch, and I lined some of those with fleece, which was interesting. I was still making in my second year of university, so 2016, and I think it was really only in I did a master's in law, and it was only when I studied for my master's that, again, I was in a situation where I was home alone a lot, and that's when I found the knitting community on YouTube, and that's when things really accelerated. So a good kind of 3 years passed where I was definitely still practicing, but I wouldn't have called myself a knitter with a capital K, if that's a thing. So there was this, and then a huge gap. So 2 to 3 years later, I knit this. This is the No Frills sweater by Petite Knit. This was my very first indie pattern designer sweater. It's the finest thing that I'd knit, in terms of gauge and weight. It was the finest thing that I'd knit. So I still, though, didn't have maybe all the requisite skills and all the requisite knowledge. So you will see some areas of this that look quite different to the pattern. Namely, I had never knit something in the round top down before, so this was a huge learning curve. And when it said to separate for the sleeves, I think I must have been knitting really late at night, and I just didn't really think about it, and I just cast off those stitches rather than putting them on hold. Now, looking back now, this is actually a feature of the sweater, this bit, this kind of picked up, it's quite almost like a seam here. It's kind of a design feature, and it's something that loads of people who are non-knitters, I wear this sweater all the time, and they always say to me, I love that detail. So you never know, in the future I might make a pattern design that involves a raglan and then this kind of some sort of seaming detail here on the sleeve, because it does also fall quite nicely. It really accentuates the drape over your shoulder and the way the fabric hangs, and then it creates quite a nice, yeah, detail on the sleeve. Anyway, I was super chuffed with this sweater when I made it. It was made on 3.5mm needles. I still didn't really understand gauge, so I just kind of blindly, I measured, so I picked the size that would work, but again, looking back, was very lucky that it all kind of worked out well. The yarn I used was mohair from Rowan. I think it was their Kid Silk Haze in their like smoky grey colourway, held with Jameson and Smith 2-ply jumper weight yarn on a cone. Because the other interesting thing at this point, I'm still a student at the time, and I was watching all these YouTube videos, so inspired, but couldn't find yarn that was within my price range at the time. So for me, the mohair was super expensive. I bought it for myself for my birthday, and then the Jameson Smith made this project viable for me because the cones are that perfect balance between quality and affordability, at least for me at that point. And I had enough yarn left over to make several other projects, which I actually gifted to other people, so I don't have them. I would insert pictures at the end of those, but I think that's just going to make this video really, really too long. So anyway, this was my first kind of proper, I say proper sweater, but a sweater where I actually finished it, beginning to end, even with a few modifications. It's very cropped is the one thing I'd say. I knew that the length that Petite Knit recommends in the pattern, I knew that style wouldn't fit me. You'll see a huge trend with all my jumpers really that they are incredibly cropped, and that's because I have something between a kind of pear-shaped figure and an hourglass figure. It's kind of in between, but fundamentally if a jumper comes down to my hips, it doesn't flatter my figure. So I do go for more cropped jumpers, but it's taken me a long time to get the right level of crop. So this is a bit borderline. It does sit on the top of my jeans, which is fantastic. I like the ease on this. Again, that was not really intentionally planned out. It just kind of happened well. So yes, this was my next jumper. The jumper after this, which I will talk to, but I unfortunately don't really have a picture of, was my first foray into colour work, and this was a bit of a sad story actually. I got a free pattern, probably one of the like I don't know if it was a drops design. I don't know if it was a one of the other kind of commercial pattern companies from the Nordic area, but it was a beautiful colourwork pattern with kind of the kind of classic star-shaped colourwork motifs. And I bought yarn from West Yorkshire Spinners, and it was about worsted weight, got knitting, and it was meant to be a sweater for my dad. And the sweater is probably one of the weirdest looking things ever. From a knitting perspective, there's nothing technically wrong with it, and I learnt loads. From a colour combination point of view, it was a disaster, at least in my eyes. It had burgundy, it had green, it had like a speckled purple and white, it had mustard, it had all sorts in there, and the main body of it is burgundy. And then the other interesting thing was I ran out of yarn on the sleeves and then couldn't find in my local shops the same weight of West Yorkshire spinners, and then I thought I'd found it, but what I actually had done is bought a different base that was thinner. So I then ended up having to hold it together. All of this to say, I think I probably learnt the most on that jumper, excuse me, and I gifted it to my dad and it didn't fit him, and this was an enormous lesson for me in gauge, about gauge and about kind of sizing things. I mean, it's always difficult to knit things for other people. Anyway, my mum now wears it all the time and loves it, which I don't know if that's just a sign of her really like motherly affection and just blind support, but she wears it all the time and out in public. So anyway, I don't have a picture of it, unfortunately. So that nightmare colourwork jumper that was meant for my dad ended up with my mum, was followed by this jumper. And funnily enough, right after I knit this, I suddenly saw lots of indie designers producing colourwork raglans, and I hadn't thought that I'd done something particularly weird here. I didn't think I'd done anything particularly innovative, but then suddenly found out people don't do colourwork raglans, or at least they hadn't done. Now there are lots of beautiful patterns. So this was semi-self-drafted, semi-based on the Petite Knit No Frill sweater. I used the Petite Knit stitch counts just to get me started, and then I knit quite a deep raglan, and then just played with colourwork really. I've got a split hem on this, which is my first time doing that. The back is ever so slightly longer than the front, and the sleeves are super wide, and I did folded hem cuffs on them, which are just whip stitched down. I knit this during a trip to the US. It was amazing, kind of plain knitting. We did lots, not very good for the environment, great from a travelling perspective. We did lots of connecting flights. And yeah, this is knit up in a cone of fingering weight yarn from Uppingham Yarns. I don't know, the exact producer of the yarn, and I don't think it really had a name. It's just a tweedy white yarn, and I knit that held double. And then the colourwork was me treating myself to Biche and Bouche, their lamb's wool fingering base. So that again was held double in, and I don't know the colourway names, but in a kind of burnt orange colour and a navy colour. And I just doodled my own colourwork designs. I just really played with it. This band of colourwork here, this was also a good learning curve for me, trying things on. This sits perfectly right under my bust, which I actually found to be quite flattering. It's what I'm trying to do with one of the whips on my needles, although I don't think I've got it quite right on that one. But this sweater is too cropped. I don't really wear it because it's too cropped, and it's too cropped by just literally a couple of centimetres. I do have a little bit of this yarn left, so maybe I just need to go and just go back in and rip out the bottom and just knit an extra tiny bit on, and then maybe I would wear this more. But it's been just sat in my cupboard for a bit, which is really sad. So keep your eyes peeled for a whip, a reinvigorated whip for this. Because it is a really lovely weight sweater. It's kind of like a DK to worsted weight sweater. It's lovely. Quite short sleeves actually, so kind of bracelet length, which was my style when I was back in uni, because it kind of kept my hands free for typing and things. But now maybe not so much. But anyway, we will see where we get to with this project. Maybe we'll revisit it. So that's 3 sweaters down. I'm going to take a sip of my tea. Oh, maybe another one too. That's good. Okay, right. So yeah, that's 3 sweaters down. Now the next sweater in my history of sweaters is one that I do have here, but I didn't pull out, and I can't quite remember why I didn't, but anyway. We'll carry on as we were. The next sweater I knit was a colourwork sweater for my other half, and this was knitted using the Strange Brew sweater recipe. So I was really excited to create something from that recipe and just went like all guns blazing and went straight to knitting. Or I think I maybe knit one other, I'm lying, I knit another sweater which I haven't got with me because I frogged it, and that's, I'll return to that in a minute. But I used the Strange Brew sweater design, and I then pulled a motif from the Knit Stitch Dictionary, which was a bicycle. So the sweater is knit up in, because there's Jameson Smith and then there's Jameson yarn. It's knit in one of those two, fingering weight, held double into a worsted weight, navy with then red, white and green. So my concepts of colours working together was getting better at this point, and it's got bicycles going around it. Now my other half is 6'3". He's tall, so this was a mammoth project. I think I knit it on 4.5mm needles, so quite a tight gauge for a worsted weight yarn, and it took me ages, and then I gifted it to him, and it's too short in the sleeves, and from my lack of colourwork experience, there is an ever so slight kind of ruffling after the colourwork because I didn't go down a needle size for the main body. I have 2 tiny balls left where I could add on a bit to his sleeves. I just haven't yet had the resilience, I think is the right word, to unravel that whole body and re-knit it at the right gauge so that the colourwork balances with the main body. I don't think sweater surgery is going to work on it because there's just too much of a difference. I don't think you could blend, like blending the gauge wouldn't work either. So anyway, another project that I haven't got here to show you, but was there to loop back to the one that I frogged. I've actually still got the yoke next door, but again, as part of going through all these projects, looking at what I've knitted over the years, I've been very keen to recycle yarn from projects where I just didn't love what I produced. And I think this is so important because there is this kind of slight consumerist mentality, particularly because there's so many beautiful yarns out there. And then there's the other side, the kind of emotional side, that you put all this effort into a project, to pull it out seems really disheartening, but then at the same time, if you're not using it, it's kind of a... So again, from Uppingham yarns, which like Holscombe, like Jameson Smith, do yarn on a cone, and it's quite cost effective. Uppingham do lots of these, and they do lots of British breeds. And I picked up the white that you saw in that other jumper, but I also picked up a cone of light grey Gotland yarn, and it was really drapey, a completely different fibre than I'd ever used. I held that double to create a kind of DK to worsted weight sweater using the Strange Brew. I used scraps of yarn for the colourwork, which again was cost effective, or kind of at least using up stash. And it was actually a really beautiful sweater. I got my whole gauge transition thing going better, I got my colourwork more even, I did these really nice sleeves with really long ribbed cuffs. In theory, a really beautiful sweater, but it was too cropped, and in this instance I didn't have any more of the grey yarn to make it any longer. And I wasn't at that point confident enough to do sweater surgery, to kind of insert some colourwork to lengthen it out. And even if I'd done that, I don't think I then would have been happy with the overall look. So that project was quite recently frogged, so that I can use the yarn again, because otherwise it's just sat there. I've taken the learnings, I've taken the enjoyment, the product didn't serve me, so now I'm going to recycle the yarn and do some more learning and hopefully have something that I really enjoy. Okay, it's so strange just talking in kind of one long flow to all of you. I know as someone who enjoys knitting podcasts that it kind of all works and it's interesting, I hope, but it is a very strange experience. Okay, so next in my sweater journey, and you'll start to see kind of leaps in the quality and my learnings, but you'll also see continued issues. So literally this light's picking up perfectly. You can see here that I didn't jump down a needle size to even out my colourwork to main knitting gauge. But hey, this project is also knit from the Strange Brew recipe, and just to give you a concept of timeline, this is post-uni. I've finished my 4 years, so I've been kind of knitting seriously for about 4 years with some gaps, but this is kind of two years into being into the knitting community, learning really rapidly. So this is knit, as I said, from the Strange Brew sweater recipe. I think it's knit from the size medium large on 3.5mm needles, and it's knit in Holst yarn in the colourway Nougat, and that is a kind of fingering weight yarn, 2-ply, quite fine. You need to block quite heavily and it blooms. And then the colour work is actually done in a superwash yarn, which was also a good experiment. And this is from Ushatita, who's a hand dyer, but I don't know the colourway name and I don't know if they still do it. And interestingly, this was also a good experiment of combining a 2-ply jumper weight woolen spun yarn, so quite airy, with a worsted spun yarn, still fingering weight but worsted spun, and as I said, superwash. So I knit the yoke of this at the beginning of 2020, pre-lockdown, COVID pandemic lockdown here in the UK. And then I took the yoke and I put it on waste yarn and I set it aside. And that was because I wanted to pick up on all these learnings. I was in a real kind of inspiration knitting kick. And I put it on waste yarn, and then I returned to it when I wanted more potato chip, just simple knitting. And that is something that I've then done since. I carry that practice forwards, that if I'm in a kick where I want to do loads of detailed knitting, I will do the detailed bits of projects, and then I will park them and go on to other detailed bits, and then come back when I want to do some plain knitting. And I find that way I really get enjoyment from every part of my project, whereas I don't know if other people do this, but when you hit Sleeve Island or you've got kind of just what feels like masses of stitches for the body, if you're not feeling it, that's not an enjoyable process. So anyway, so this sweater, it's again on the cropped side, it's probably just about the right length. The big thing for me on this sweater that means I don't get as much wear from it as I should is at the time there was quite a trend of doing kind of straight sleeves and then gathering them in at the wrist. And I did that on this one, and I went down a needle size for ribbing, which I hadn't been doing previously, so that was a good experiment. But because they're bracelet length, they stop here, and it just doesn't flatter the shape of my arm. It kind of looks like I've got overdeveloped muscles in my forearm, and then makes my wrist look really thin. Now, if that was my body shape, that would be totally fine, but it's not. So I'm not sure this kind of helps me display my body in the way I'd want to, I think, fundamentally. I hope that all came out right. So anyway, this next one, but I was very happy with the colour work. As you can see, a tiny little bit of rippling afterwards where I didn't drop down a needle size, but generally things are getting neater. Okay, the next project, and now we're fully into the COVID pandemic here in the UK at this point. My next jumper or sweater project was actually a t-shirt. Now, this is the Chauncey pattern by Isabel Kramer, and I was quite reluctant to knit this. That sounds weird. Isabel's designs are beautiful and very well written patterns, but they, you know, her body type, a bit like petite knits, is very different to mine. And I think something I've always been quite conscious of is, yes, you can modify patterns, but it's just about kind of accepting that some things are not going to be a shape that's going to suit you. And yes, you can make something slightly different, you can modify it for yourself, but you know, when I look at some of her designs, I go, oh, I really want that sweater and I want it the way that she's knit it. But in reality, that wouldn't be good for me. So it's a real way up, but I love the pattern. This was actually a second attempt at it. I'd knit it in the remainder of the Jameson & Smith 2-ply that I knit that pink no frills jumper in. I knit it in that earlier, and I got all the way down the body only to find that my colour work, I was 1 stitch off on the chart midway down the colour work, and I hadn't noticed until I'd knit the whole body. And I also wasn't a massive fan of the contrast colour, the colour combo I'd chosen, so I ripped that all out. And then I knit this. So this is in, it's in a wool cotton blend. I want to say I want to say it's a Danish yarn. I know they stock it in Beautiful Knitters, because that's where I ordered this from, but I can't remember the exact name, so I'll put that in the notes on this episode. This was my first sweater, putting some short rows in the back up here above the colourwork to raise the back neckline, so that was a good experiment. And then I knit this without sleeves, and I knit it kind of cropped again. This is actually a very good cropped length on me. There's good even, even transition from colourwork to the main body. The colourwork, it's kind of showing up funny on camera, but the colourwork is knitted in a variegated yarn, and it was I got some minis to knit this. I think I got maybe 1 or 2 minis, and I still have some left from them, and I think is it called lichen and lace, or lichen lace? Again, stocked in, or lichen. I'm doing really well here, aren't I? They're stocked in Beautiful Knitters. I will put some links, if they are still stocking them, or to the main brand in my show notes. But it was a nice way, it was a nice experiment for me, seeing how far I could get with using minis for colour work rather than needing to buy kind of whole big skeins of yarn or balls. The one thing I would say about this that means I now wear it less is, at the expense of potentially being a bit too personal, my body changed quite drastically right before the pandemic, and then probably over the course of the pandemic too, but right before the pandemic my bust circumference increased, all sorts increased, and I don't think I really accounted for that in my knitting. And what happens with this top is, I don't know if you can see it on camera, and I kind of don't want to get too close because that's going to come on to a second point, but it stretched all the stitches right here under my arms. And to be honest, to this day, I have still not quite perfected how to get the right proportion of stitches under my arms. We'll get there. But yes, that was kind of a bit of a sad point for this top, that after a few wears, those stitches were stretched and haven't really bounced back because of the cotton content. It's not got that same memory. The other thing you might be able to see on camera is this yarn felted hugely under the arms, and for a top you kind of want to wear in the spring/summer, that's not ideal. So I am going to go as far as to say that's a con of this yarn, because in fairness, if it had felted maybe 10 wears in, different story, but this felted on wear 1. So that was a bit, and it was felting, yeah, literally as I was wearing it, not from washing. The pills and stuff, that's fine, that's expected, but yeah, I was really upset that felted so quickly. Other than that though, the weight and the drape of this top is really beautiful. Really, really love this. Okay, we're good like halfway through the stack, but I think at this point it's definite that we're going to be doing 2-parters for this video, so that everyone can reset and watch bits as and when they choose. I'm going to take another sip of tea. Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out what order. Okay, coming back to that principle of kind of doing a yoke, or doing, knitting the bits of a project that you feel like knitting at the time. Right after doing the chauncey top or sweater, and after doing my kind of stone coloured and gold yoked sweater, I did the yoke of this sweater. Now this yoke is probably one of my favourite things that I have created. This is, COVID is well underway, and I was on a yoke kick. So this was knit on 3.5mm needles, and it was using the stitch counts from the Strange Brew sweater recipe from Tin Can Knits. Again, I was kind of trying to really learn a lot from that book, which is very easy to do. There's a lot of information and a lot of tips and tricks. So I knit this on 3.75mm needles. I knit the medium large size again, which gave me the perfect amount of ease. And originally, I don't know if you can see on camera, but there's the navy collar here, and then there's a kind of section of blue collar, a blue rib below, a slightly different colour blue below. So I actually knit this main collar on later. It originally didn't have this, it was originally more like that. And what I did was used, I think there was a Madeline Tosh was the blue, and then there was I think it's called Spiced Plum from Town and City or Townhouse Yarns. I bought it from a yarn story in Bath. It's beautiful, it's a silk merino blend. And I just thought the dye was gorgeous, and I just wanted to make it with a contrast of blue. There's a small section of grey yarn here, which was a fingering weight yarn that I picked up when I was in Norway, and I don't know what brand that was. But I just played with mosaic colour work. So lots of slip stitches, stripes, but just experimenting with not just using two stranded colour work. Apart from at the bottom here, where you can see I did like a kind of almost like the equivalent of a broken rib, but in colour work. So I absolutely love the yoke. It's gorgeous, and what I did was, I put it on hold yarn, and then I came back to this later. So I'll dress the sweater as a whole now, but the main body of this and the sleeves were actually finished end of 2021, beginning of 2022. So I went back in and added this collar because it was sitting way too wide at my neck. This is Holstgarn held double, so a slightly different gauge to what I'd done the yoke in, but I wanted something that was really going to provide structure to the top, and I didn't want it to stretch out. And this sweater's not heavy, but it's got a little bit of weight to it. So I went back in and put that in. That's just 1x1 rib, and then the body is also done in Holstgarn, and I held it single for the body, and I just knit fairly straight sleeves, no decreases. I'd say these sleeves, there's something funny about the way they hang, which annoys me, and I can't quite figure it out, but I think when I wear this, because I do wear it, I wear it for work and for other things, but when I wear it, the elbow hangs funny. Like when my arms are straight, you can see the pointy bit where my elbow is when I've got my arms crossed or folded or whatever. And I think that's just to do with the fabric that I've created, how quickly the wool bounces back or not. I think a worsted spun yarn would probably bounce back quicker into shape, whereas the 2-ply just takes a bit longer. So in my future, I can see myself potentially going back to revisit these sleeves and putting decreases in so they're a little bit more fitted, and hopefully that will also avoid them kind of hanging funny. So that is that sweater. The only thing I didn't say was there's bits of the yoke where I've held the Spiced Plum with a bit of that Kid Silk Haze from Rowan in a light grey colour that I used in the no frills. So I really was again using up scraps alongside that beautiful colourwork skein. But yeah, overall, like, very happy with the knitting quality of this, very happy with the gauge, the drape, love the yoke, but just wearability wise, there's just a few issues on the sleeves. I could even take the sleeves down and make it a short top. That might work quite well. Okay, going for another sip of tea. Okay, so next project, haha. Sorry, this is going to get a little bit boring in terms of the patterns I've knit from, although hopefully a really, really good review for the Tin Can Knits Strange Brew sweater recipe, because I've just found that has such a good fit for round yokes. that I just keep going back to it again and again. I have the hard copy version and I just love like marking the pages. You can follow top down, bottom up, whatever you like to do. So this is another sweater knit using the numbers and the calculations from the Strange Brew sweater pattern. But this one is not necessarily colourwork, this is just striped. So even more of the whole yarn in, I think it's their like, what do they call it? It's their like darkest navy, and it's got a bit of black in it actually. So that's the navy going through all of this, and the stripes are knit up in a Malabrigo merino singles and silk blend gradient set. My first time buying a gradient set, and I hadn't really knit with Malabrigo before, and I'd also seen really mixed reviews on knitting jumpers with merino singles, and I wanted to see whether putting the silk content in meant that it would kind of hold up better. This top I absolutely love. It works really well with jeans. The only thing that is tricky for me is it's got, I don't know if it's picking up on camera, but it's got this kind of mauvey purple colour in it, and that's not a colour normally in my wardrobe, and it means I find it really difficult to pair this with jackets. None of my jackets go with that. So I tend to reserve this just for the summer, but then in the summer it's like, if it's hot enough just to wear a t-shirt. Anyway, but I do really love this, and it fits really nicely. So a couple of tops. And then we jump forwards. That must have been kind of end of 2021 that got finished. That was kind of a slow burn project. And then we hop into the beginning of 2022. So for Christmas of 2021, my family gifted me, they said to me, we know you love knitting, we know that you know, you don't treat yourself to yarn very often. As you can see, those sweaters I've just discussed either come from kind of very good value combed yarn with the odd indie dyed skein or kind of more luxurious yarn thrown in, but I hadn't bought a high quantity of yarn. It was very much like for specific projects and just kind of really trying to be very deliberate, and I think in doing so there was loads of patterns that I held off making because I didn't know whether I could find a substitute that I thought would produce what I wanted. And after that mohair project, the No Frills, I hadn't bought mohair since because it is a more expensive yarn. So my family said, what would be a real treat yarn for you? Like, what would you really love to make that you wouldn't buy yarn for yourself? And the answer to that was another petite knit sweater, which is the contrast sweater. I actually was wearing this in episode 2 of the regular podcast that I've now started. So I have gone into more detail over there, but just as a very quick recap, I knit this quite oversized. I knit this, my family bought me the Isea mohair and a Gepard garn mohair, and then the Isea Highland wool in the kind of neutral base. So they bought me that, they bought me some other yarn which I actually still haven't knitted up because it's so precious and I don't know what I want to knit it into. Maybe I could do a stash video and that will come up in there. Anyway, knit this very oversized, continued with the straight sleeve design. This one's got hugely wide sleeves because I didn't taper them at all. You can just about see the contrast section. I went for a very low contrast section, and I changed the mohair colour, not the main fingering weight yarn colour. But this sweater I wear all the time. I wear it to work. I've knit a kind of belt to go with it, so for work it gives me a kind of really nice kind of oversized but still smart look. And then when I'm at home I throw this on over multiple t-shirts when I'm cold, and it's really cozy, and yeah, it's just a really great knit. So really pleased with this. Haven't really got much more to say about it other than really pleased with it. It's knit at a slightly looser gauge than I would normally knit at, so that was quite good for me and kind of pushing myself to, yeah, I had this feeling that knitting in looser gauges didn't look as professional. I wanted all my stuff to look as like, you know, as perfect, if that's a word, as possible. And this was a really good thing for me to learn, that you can do that at looser gauges. Okay, I promise we're really getting here, guys. So we've got I've got 3 sweaters left on the floor. Let me take my final few sips of tea. And you catch yourself on the camera and what you look like sipping tea. Okay, this next one is a point of annoyance for me. Okay, so this is knit. I believe I followed the pattern from a Spastrico, Melissa at a Spastrico, their like classic sweater, I think it's called. They've got a number of raglan sweaters with slightly different finishing techniques, slightly different proportions. They've got like the turtle doves and all sorts. So this, I think, is knit from one of their patterns, quite heavily modified. So the long and the short is, I'm happy with it until probably about here, like under the arms. So it's got a really nice high neck, and that's knit in twisted rib. And then I like the length of the sleeves. I've put a nice detail in there, which I now include in lots of my projects, which is to knit a plain knit row after the ribbing, but before the cast off. And then I actually went back in and put a I-cord edging on the sleeve, which I think looks really professional, so really happy with that. The other thing that I like about the sweater is I did raglan increases until here, and then I knit straight, and then I picked back up for the sleeves again, because I really wanted a kind of really loose sleeve, almost slip over style, but not quite, a blend between a top and a slip over. Then under the arms, I've done, and like down the sides, don't know how well you can see, but there's a little cable. And then at the bottom, I have picked up stitches and done an I-cord edge the whole way around the bottom. This was knit in Durerum Natura Ulysses base, in the kind of like sagey colour. This yarn is beautiful. It's DK weight, I believe. It's really plump. It's got gorgeous kind of, not full on tweed, but it's got like the odd speckle of a tweedy kind of little fleck. It wears beautifully. It's really cosy. However, I only bought 3 balls of this yarn, and they come in 50-gram balls, and I really should have had about 6, maybe 5. I need at least another 2, because this is just too cropped. The other thing is because I've made it so cropped, but I've also made this with huge amounts of positive ease for me, and as you can see, like, it's just very, like, there's a lot of fabric widthways. Because it's not got the weight of the rest of the body, it hangs like a teepee on me. It hangs so far off my back and my front, so I kind of look like I've put one of those crinoline, like, you know, the big skirts they used to wear in Victorian times. They put metal or plastic to, well, now plastic, then metal, to make it stand proud. That is what this looks like. So I think what I can probably do is rip out the I-cord, rip back a few rows, so I've got some of this batch of the yarn there, and then if I buy another 2 balls, I can probably lengthen this into a sweater I'll actually really love, or like a top that I'll really love. But at the moment, I don't love it. But here you can see with me hanging it upside down, just how deep those sleeves are, and it's got this really kind of beautiful V shape, which I think will be really flattering. It's just currently not quite right. So, more work to do on that one. As you can see, a couple of projects to kind of go back into and tweak. Okay, and now we're beginning to come to 2 projects that I am super proud of. So I think 2022 was really the year where I started to hit my stride with modifying things, with getting the exact gauge I wanted, with it felt like 2022 was a year when things really came together for me. So This project was finished in time for Christmas for 2022. Broadly speaking, it's based off the no frills stitch counts, I think. But I knit this at a really tight gauge. So I knit this long ribbed collar on a 3mm needle, holding Issea Highland wool, again in the colourway Curry, with Gepard yarn, their like golden mohair, which was just beautiful. And then I did a couple of raglan increases off the rib, but then I stopped working the round and I knit flat for all of this, and then I started to do some increases so that it would kind of come out again like past my chest and down to here, and then I joined it back in the round again, knit for, I want to say like 4 to 6 inches. I put a kind of faux seam down the side, I don't know if you can see that, using a purl stitch. It's then got a split hem, and then I kept the same needle size for the body to do the ribbing, which is the same length on both sides of the hem, and then I used the same needle size again for the kind of edging of the arms. I was thinking about going back down to the 3mm needle, but I didn't want it to kind of gather back again around the arms. I wanted it to sit very flat, and that actually worked really well, whereas around the neckline I wanted it to kind of sit cozy. I wear this so much. This is, as I say, I finished it end of 2022, and I've probably worn this 10 to 15 times already. It is so in my wheelhouse. I love this colour. It's kind of got the curry coloured yarn, gives it an ever so slight green, which I know sounds a bit weird, and then the mohair really pops, and the stitch definition's great, and yeah, I'm just really proud of it, and it fits perfectly. So again, and I think the other, like, at this point in my knitting progression, the other kind of key, I guess, reflection is I'd gone from knitting in like pinks and blues, which were my, you know, I do love pinks and blues, but I'd gone from knitting just in pinks and blues and quite bright colours, which I always found quite difficult at times to incorporate into my wardrobe, to knitting in much more neutral colours, and also when I do knit in something brighter, to knit with intent of what I'm going to wear it with, and I think that has been part of the huge success in this piece of knitting. Okay, final sweater, everybody. Probably, as I say, another one of my kind of things I'm most proud of that I've knitted. Sorry, doing a hair readjustment. This is a story of woe, in the sense that this jumper was re-knit, I'd say 2 or 3 times. I started it off and I wasn't using thick enough yarn. So let me give you a background. So I have discussed this in a knitting podcast, my first knitting podcast episode, because I was wearing it. This is the Brighter sweater by Junko Okamoto. It was one of their fairly early designs, I think, and the pattern, to the best of my recollection, doesn't come with multiple different sizes. It just is what it is, and then you can kind of use gauge to rejig. That's my recollection, I could be wrong, don't hold me to that. But also the pattern is written in quite a different style to the other patterns that I had read before. And long story short, I started with way too thin a yarn, the gauge was completely off, the neck, I couldn't even get it over my head, so I knit kind of most of the yoke, which is really quite involved and quite detailed, and then found I couldn't put it over my head. And then I also knit a second version, started knitting a second version, and I couldn't get the increase. I couldn't follow the instructions in a way that produced a good increase after the yoke. It ended up really frilly, and it was too rapid an increase it just didn't look right. So third time lucky, and I've re-knit sections of this multiple times, but I knit the yoke. This is Holst yarn on the cone in their kind of silver grey colourways. It's a fingering weight yarn, held double. Knit the yoke, it's got some short rows at the back to raise the back neckline. I then knit all of the body and then had to rip all the way back because the body had so many stitches and then it had this quite tight rib and it made me look like a little ball. So I ripped back and then I knit. I changed the level of increases here so that I didn't get all the fluttering. And then I did raglan style increases along here. I don't know if I can show this very well, along here. And then I knit straight, and then I've done an incredibly tapered body. Don't know how well you can see that. So it comes into my waist, and then all this ribbing is in twisted rib. And then these sleeves, I mean, I must have been knitting the body and the yoke. I finally got cracked and nailed probably within a month, but then it just sat on my needles because it had all of this to do. And because of the way I constructed the body and because of the way I wanted the sleeves are incredibly wide. And then you've got this very detailed cluster stitch and broken rib and eyelet pattern going all the way down the sleeves. And I mean, I think it looks absolutely beautiful now, but it just languished for probably the best part of a year. And then I finally picked it up at the end of 2022 just to like get it done because I really wanted the finished product. But yeah, 2 of these very involved sleeves. I'm not going to be knitting one anytime soon, another one, because it just was such a investment project, but we are almost there with it. And I really love the weight of it now. This is a really thick, cozy, warm sweater. So that is all the sweaters I have piled up next to me. There is a couple of others that are either works in progress that I've knit over the years and I've just never really finished them. And I think I'll cover that in a whips/frogging episode. But I think, you know, the projects that make it through to being finished are the ones that, you know, you end up seeing, but they don't necessarily account for the full learning journey. There's another project that I reknit 3 times, which was massive, super time consuming, which was a sweater for my dad, because obviously that original colourwork one never ended up going to him. I knit that one again using the Tin Can Knits recipe, and I must have reknit that 3 times. It's a men's extra large, and because I wanted him to be able to wear it over other layers, so I was trying to consider how he'd wear it, and I know he only really wears thick sweaters when it's really cold, and then he'll have several t-shirts underneath. And I knit that in Holsgarn, and just combination of wanting it to be a surprise for him, but then not having him around all the time to be able to like hold it up against him. And I knit it so it fit him, but the gauge was too drapey really for a men's sweater. It just looked like it just didn't hang right on him. It wasn't his style, so then I had to reknit the whole thing. And I ended up making him one with a kind of similar stitch pattern to the anchor designed by Petite Knit. I haven't got that pattern, but she basically does like a kind of, it's almost like rows of ribbing, but you change where you're doing the purl and the knit so that it kind of creates a yoke, and you put your increases in between. Anyway, it had like a folded collar, folded hem on sleeves, and then just a plain simple hem at the bottom. I'm very proud of it. I still don't know if it's exactly what he would have wanted, but that was definitely, again, huge learning curves in terms of gauge. So, at the expense of rambling anymore, I think in terms of key takeaways and things that I'm still left to learn, really, I was never good at doing gauge swatches, partially because of impatience, partially because I was always playing yarn chicken, trying to make my projects, trying to reduce the cost of my projects. Now that I have knit a certain quantity of things, I don't feel that impatience anymore. I think there was just this want to have all my own knitwear that I could wear, and now that I've got a certain volume, I'm definitely sensing I'm becoming more patient, therefore being able to kind of save up for yarn for very specific projects, and also because I'm knitting less stuff, because I'm less impatient, I'm able to also buy more intentionally and buy that extra ball so that I have enough to kind of gauge swatch and keep that swatch afterwards. What else have I learned? Well, I think the main thing is that I'm still learning, and that's almost like the thing that I've learned. Like, I don't think there was anything that I've shown you that I'm like, that's absolutely perfect, probably with the exception of that slip over. And I think sometimes that's just lucky, and sometimes there's so many factors that go into whether the sweater is perfect. And yeah, I think that the stitches under my arms are going to continue to be something that I figure out what works perfectly for me, and I might crack it for one designer's style of patterns, but then not for another. I haven't knit anything bottom up since that first colourwork sweater that my mum now wears, so I'm challenging myself to do something bottom up, aka my Medina that I'm pointing to. You can't see it, but it's over there. The Medina is bottom up. I think ultimately that's probably not a design style that I like. And I'm just excited to try more things with different kind of tailoring techniques now. But I think, yeah, definitely learning more about the kind of gauges that I like knitting at, the kind of fit that I like, and yeah, I think, and learning to kind of accept that things didn't quite work out the way you wanted to, and it's painful, but rip stuff out if it doesn't work. So I'm going to leave this here, and I'm going to wait to do a second part covering accessories, of which there are quite a lot. And I hope this was helpful. I hope this was interesting. Please do comment below if you would like me to do these, you know, again in the future, or if there's any projects you'd like me to do a bit more of an in-depth conversation on. I don't keep Ravelry pages for most of my projects. That's never been something I've been very good at. In 2023, I am trying to keep a better list of when I knit things and all the details on them, so that for future videos, you know, in future years, I can come back and give a lot more information. But yeah, do comment below whether this was helpful, whether you'd like more, and I will see you in part 2 very shortly.